Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Telemanker Review. Oh, wow. Have a bit of a day today. Well, the last 3 or 4 days, last week actually, I've been not busy, but I've been learning new skills. Okay. Old Bruce here is being indoctrinated into the world of artificial intelligence. And it's because I have to explain a little bit of what I do, and let me get that volume up as usual, and how I do it, okay? Now, since the inception of what I do, which is to write applications, I call it grant writing, but really what I do is I write applications for credit. Every I think first world country does this, and some countries outside of the first world. And what these governments do is they offer tax rebates or tax credits for scientific research and experimental development. It's the government's way of investing in the country, investing in industry. And as I said, there's a program with the IRS, there's a program with the Canadian Revenue Service, there's a program with the Australian Revenue Service, the New Zealand Revenue Service, the British Revenue Service, because countries are really big on investing in technology. And why wouldn't they be? It seems in many ways like technology is the future of economy, right? Now, this really has nothing to do with what I usually talk about on the Telemanker Review, but it's just an opportunity to get to know me a little bit better, I guess, if that actually interests anybody. Now, traditionally, for the last several decades, I've been doing this about 5 years now, but for the last several decades, this has been done through an interview process. And the companies that you do this writing for, they will have a certain amount of documentation. Generally companies that build things will have what are called architectural blueprints. And then they'll have specifications. And there's usually two classes of specification. One's called a functional specification and one's called a technical specification. And I've made a good portion of my professional writing career writing those kinds of documents. And really, at the end of the day, it's a form of journalism. So you have to develop a conversational and comprehensive understanding of the field you're working in, whatever it is. I would say that mine is software and telecommunications, okay? And but generally, for the first 5 years I did this, it comes down to the quality of the information you get from the company, and then follow-up interviews, and then I record the interviews, and then I create transcripts out of the interviews, and the interviews answer all of my key questions about whether this was experimental development done through a systemic investigation. Okay, it can't be normal work. It has to be work that has a certain amount of risk associated with it, hence the term experimental. And if you're successful, you will have created something relatively new. And it doesn't have to be earth-shattering. It could be something that's even just relatively new for your company. But every company is unique in the sense that the way they combine different platforms together to create a product or a service is unique, and the problems that arise in advancing that combination of products to meet the needs of the market are also unique, and generally, very often they qualify as experimental development. So it's been very journalistic up until now, but my boss and I, we sort of went out on a limb here, and we partnered with a third-party company that developed a product. And this product is built with artificial intelligence. And what this product does is it goes out and it looks at all of the rhetoric, all of the notes in a repository. Okay, so developers, whether they're working in a building or they're logging into a secure network from home, they're generally working off of the same file structure. And there's a process by which all the other developers know when the file is being checked out and worked on, because if they go to check it out, it'll say that it's locked and so has the file open. And this is to make sure that two engineers, two software developers don't make changes to the same file at the same time. And when developers are writing code, they will leave notes in the code so that other developers coming after them will be able to understand what they did, because code's not readily understandable even by other coders. And this is called the process of documenting the code. The more familiar developers are with what they're jointly working on, and the more familiar they are with each other. So for example, in the case of a smaller company that is a startup and it has 10, 12, 14 guys that know how to work with each other, like almost like a military unit, they'll be very sparse on the documentation, because in startup companies, there's not a huge requirement for documentation. It doesn't become a super important factor until you grow, until you go public and you issue shares or stocks, or until you take in a significant amount of private venture capital. And then all the documentation standards come in. Like a phone book has a standard. It has to be alphabetical. It has to have the person's first name, their middle initial if there is one, or their middle name if they want it in the phone book. And then it has to have the street they live on. So that's the formal structure for a phone book, and that's formal documentation. Whereas we all have contact applications on our computers that are relatively informal, right? So that's the difference between informal and formal documentation. So I generally get called into a company to do work if I'm working as a technical writer, when they've reached that level where they have to provide standard documentation for shareholders or for a significant investment of venture capital, but they're still a private company. And the reason this becomes mandated is that the venture capitalists want to make sure that they can own the product if anything happens to the principal developers, right? It's a kind of an insurance. So this has been my trade since 1997, technical writing. There's nothing fancy about it. It's almost like being a fancy kind of secretary or stenographer in a court. It's a little bit more than that, and maybe down being self-derogatory a little bit, but there's nothing really fancy to it. But it's a very good trade, and has habitually paid me anywhere between $40 and $140 an hour, depending on the project I'm working on. And really, really lends itself to remote work, because you can't fake it. If somebody asks you for a 20-page document based on something, and they give you a month to do it, and they say, okay, we'll pay you $5,000 to do it, at the end of the month, you either have the 20 pages or you don't. They don't care if you're coming into an office or whether you're doing it from an earthbag bodega in the middle of the Talamanca Mountains. They don't give a rat's ass. All they care about is, can you deliver? So now we've moved into AI, and we partnered with a company, and they will end up getting a percentage of what the commission is on the claim. And they wrote this AI software that goes into the code repositories and to the team communication centers. Some of you may know some of these products. You know, one of the big ones in the market goes by the name of Jira, and it will extract all of the notes and analyze them and give you an analysis or an outline of whether it meets or may need further investigation to determine whether or not it meets the criteria for the grant you're applying for. And so I'm working on my first client now where I'm transitioning to this. And it's fascinating. It's a superior form of knowledge extraction, but it requires a new way of me approaching and forming what I'm going to write. And I myself had to get a subscription to a relatively decent AI. I ended up going with Gemini because it works really well with Google, and you can post all the results to Google Docs, and it gives you another terabyte on Google. It's a little pricey for a monthly subscription. It's like $26.99 per month US. 24, I think 24 comes out to 30 or 31 Canadian a month. And then what I do is I take the data the AI company gives us that wrote the AI algorithms to go in and look for the material that is pertinent to the grant application. And then I have to do further AI refinement on their data and chunk it into meaningful sections. So for example, stuff like, I got it right here. I'll read it for you. By the way, the client I'm working right now, here's the introductory paragraph. We exist in the legal cannabis space as a software provider for government auditing and all facets of sales and inventory. This is a regulated market. Our system serves government, Cannabis Act, SC 2018 C16, companies, individual dispensaries, growers of marijuana who supply the vendors, and the customers themselves who walk in off the street to make purchases. So this is a client. This will be about the 4th or 5th year I've written their grant application. As you can well imagine, they're constantly innovating, constantly expanding what they can do to stay competitive, to stay market dominant. They're breaking in. I think last year they broke into the US market. A couple young guys, I think they're like late 20s, early 30s. These are the kinds of guys that become multimillionaires, right? A lot of the people I work with, they become multimillionaires, these startup companies. And I get to meet them when they're sort of young and fresh. Everybody finds me very engaging in this world, and I get the same thing every time. I've never met anybody quite like you. I go, thank you. And it's a combination of the way I live, where I live, the fact that I write books, although I don't really tell my clients about the books. I'm not sure I'd want one of my clients reading The Devil in Us. My boss read it, loved it. And he also read Stardust Ranch, bought the paperbacks. And if my boss tells a client that he just got, oh, you're going to be working with my software guy, Bruce, ask him about his books, I generally recommend Stardust Ranch. I consider that the most presentable book I've written. Whereas Light of Darkness or The Devil in Us is more they're more esoteric, right? And do you know what esoteric means, right? Esoteric means knowledge by initiation only. You're not really going to understand those books unless you've gone into that world yourself and you've been curious about that world and you've asked questions. And then I come in with my books and I answer the questions and you go, wow, that was edifying. But to start cold, to not know anything about what's going on in Light of Darkness or Devil in Us, It'd be pretty shocking, and people might think I'm a paranoid schizophrenic, but that's just what I gotta live with, right? So this particular client, we're doing it's like huge what they're doing this year. I have to submit 5 different 1,400 word applications. I've got one for the advancements they've done in inventory reporting, security and authentication, inventory management, and payment, right? And these are all various systems. And I mean, just you got to understand how big and complex these systems get now, right? Just the payment component of a continental dispensary system maintained in the same server cluster with backups. But the server cluster is in Toronto. They might have 20 machines. And all of this material has to be preserved, right, by both American and Canadian legislation. Because marijuana is a regulated industry, just like alcohol. So you're only allowed a small amount of wastage. They want to know where every gram goes, and more importantly, this is interesting. They want to know where every gram in your inventory came from, because they don't want independent growers getting their marijuana into the system. Anyway, today, because I have a loose idea for a podcast, but today I thought I'd share a little bit with you about what I do for a living. And so I've done drafts of these like 3-4 different times and scrapped them and started over. And this is the process of me learning the AI. But once it's learned, whoa, this is going to be a really efficient way to do what I do, and I'm really glad that my boss found and teamed up with this AI company to do this. All right. There's a very boring intro to the Talamanca Review, what I do for a living. Tonight I want to talk a little bit about irony and what I call the ironic mirror, which is a way of seeing the world, okay? If you go back to one of the last podcasts I did on time and all the movie trailers I played and what all of those trailers are doing, okay? Those trailers are investing an emotional and a thinking pattern into people over and over and over and over again. Now, to understand a lot of what is said on the Talamanca Review, you have to be in the game. And by in the game, I mean you have to have crossed a certain line in terms of your understanding of how this reality works. Now, you can come at it from very, very many different ways. I have a number of listeners who, when I speak to them off air, they like to talk to me in the language of the Gnostic, right? They've done a lot of studies in Gnosticism, and they find a lot of parallels between my work and what the Gnostic scriptures are telling them. And so I can work with that. I don't necessarily agree with Gnosticism. I don't believe we're trapped here. You're trapped here if you stay at a certain level of consciousness, but I've already explained this on the Talamanca Review. The energy that sustains this reality comes from the Creator. What we experience in this reality can be hacked, and it often is. But the energy that grows the trees, that births babies, that keeps rivers flowing and the sun and everything, it's coming from what we would call a creator. And the very fact that the energy can get in here is all the evidence you need that we, as an energy expression, can get out of here. And it gives you the way to do it as well. It means that to get out of here, you have to, the frequency of your energy, your consciousness, has to match the Creator. Okay? Heavy things about us, like heavy thoughts, heavy regrets, heavy attachments, heavy feelings, heavy addictions, or even just addictions, they will keep us trapped here. And in that state of consciousness, the Gnostic material is accurate, but it's only accurate to that state of consciousness. When you go beyond that state of consciousness, it no longer becomes accurate. Okay? So let me give you a real world example. If you're living somewhere in Africa, a drought is only a problem if you don't know how to drill a well. The moment you know how to divine, or if you can bring the technology in, do LiDAR of the ground to find where the water pockets are, where the underground water reserves are, and then you drill, you get your pipe in place, and you bring your water up, and you don't have a drought anymore. So drought is only a problem for people who don't know how to find and extract water. The Gnostic paradigm of being trapped down here is only a problem for people who can't go beyond astral consciousness. It's generally the astral body that gets trapped here, because the astral body is the one that gets laden with all the regrets and that sort of stuff. You'll have a pretty good sense of where you're going in your afterlife by what occurs in your inner life, your dreams and your meditations. You'll get a foreshadowing of what your afterlife is going to be like. So there's this concept of an ironic mirror. And it's a way of looking at what some people call karma. Okay? And the ironic mirror is everywhere now. I coined this term up here at my house on the front balcony. I literally invented this term to explain a concept I was trying to pass to Bob. Well, I think the first time he was up here and we were having a conversation. And the ironic mirror, before we get to the ironic mirror, I want to spend a little bit more time on how consciousness works. Okay, and this is what happens on the Talamanca Review. I lose the thread of my thoughts so often, okay? So you need to be kind of in the game in your own way to understand what's discussed on the Talamanca Review. So I have Gnostics, I have some Buddhists, I have some people of a yogic disposition who listen, shamanic training, but they're in the game, meaning that they know that consciousness is more than just physical and is not generated and maintained by the body. It's affected by the body, but not maintained by the body, and in many ways, independent of the body. If you have already figured that out on your own, then this is a great podcast for you to listen to. If you're in the process of figuring that out, this is also a great podcast for you to listen to. Okay? I've also said a number of things on my show about the New Age concept of manifestation, which I consider to be spiritually juvenile and, quite frankly, a little bit stupid. But most people are juvenile and stupid now in the first world. And I'm not saying that to be offensive. I'm saying that to be accurate. We do not live in a world of serious people anymore. We can do serious things. You know, a chemical engineer can do serious things, an electrical engineer can do serious things, a mechanical engineer can do serious things. A practical physicist can do serious things. CERN is a serious thing. Okay? what happened to the Voyager satellite at the outer boundary of our solar system, as described by Cliff High's latest podcast, which I finally got around to watching, is a serious thing. Okay? I'm not saying that serious things aren't going on. I'm saying that by and large, we're not a serious people anymore. Okay? And a serious people would take the small things in life more seriously. You know, how you love the people around you, how you raise your children, how you treat your family, things like this. And in that regard, we're a collapsing society. And collapsing societies can often provide very many lessons about reality. Societies being created and societies collapsing can teach a lot. Societies in a status quo, they can teach as well, but they're really about maintaining at the end of the day. So one of the things I like to take the piss out of from time to time is this concept of manifestation. And when I talk about manifestation, I'm talking about it in the New Age context. I'm talking about it the way people set goals in business. There's no need to use a spiritual technique like visualization to manifest a goal if the goal is garbage. If the goal is to sell more cars, then you're kind of misusing consciousness technology. You're kind of becoming a black magician in your own way. And there's a massive proliferation of this thinking in the world now. Business thinking, which is really just a form of magic. The attempt to manifest things and to, in this manifestation, to accrue wealth in excess of your value to society. You should be morally ashamed to have wealth in excess of your value to society. At least drug dealers and cartel leaders have the honesty to feel that shame in some measure. I'm a drug dealer. I don't provide much benefit to society. My product kills a lot of people. I am a billionaire. I like the money, but I am not kidding myself that I provide a tremendous value to society. I can work with that. It's the lack of hypocrisy that I like. I can work with it. The people I find difficult to deal with are the people who do shitty things and don't even know they're doing shitty things. And those people are proliferating. And the reason they're proliferating is because of the ironic mirror and because of all the bad consciousness technology being put out there now. So bad consciousness technology is everywhere now. In fact, we've just everything goes into this consumption machine we live in now, this capital machine. And it all comes off of the root magic of money, which is the foundational magic by which this society and the world functions now. And it can be a little depressing sometimes when you see it in its true context, because there's nothing really beautiful or good about it, and nothing really beautiful or good is going to happen until we get out of these very crass systems. But what kind of a world would we be living in? And this is, of course, why they keep all the scientism going and all of the future talk, because, you know, they want you to feel as though you're shareholders in this human enterprise, this human corporation, and you're going to go to Mars with the billionaires, and you're going to benefit from all of this. And what an extraordinary time to be alive, don't you know? And, oh, geez, they put Katy Perry into space, don't you know? And really, you should start to be seeing through this stuff now, because it's all a bunch of bullshit, okay? And as I've said time and time again on the Talamanca Review, the most extraordinary piece of technology on this planet is now and always will be you as a living spirit and as a soul occupying a body. If you want to investigate the greatest piece of technology on the planet, investigate yourself. You are the greatest piece of technology on the planet. Leonardo da Vinci was right. Man is the measure of all things. And that's why everything we invent is a metaphor of human capability. The iPhone is a literal metaphor of our telepathic ability, of the spiritual network we already live in. Wi-Fi is an adjunct to this. It's not that I'm against going to space. I just don't think you need to build ships to do it. You should be able to do it as a contemplative. You don't think these Tibetans are going all over the universe in their meditations? I assure you they are. Okay? So there's a few reasons that they use popular culture and movies and music to shape consciousness, and there's two main reasons that they use the technology they do. And it's the same language you hear in the court system. It's to charge you and to discharge you. And if you're not discharged, you are convicted. Okay? So charging and discharging are the two principal fulcrums there. Just a sec, I think the dog wants in. Yeah, he wanted in. So charging and discharging you. So when they charge you up, it's to invest you with a thought construct that has an ancillary or a conjoined emotional content to the internal imagery. Okay? And what they're doing is they're literally appropriating your consciousness ability, your magnetism, to bring their goal into reality. Whereas you should be using your consciousness to bring your goal to fruition. Okay? And when they're discharging, and this is magic worked upon the popular mind, okay? So when they're discharging, what they're doing is they're trying to take something that has built up in the collective unconscious, and in many instances, percolated over to the conscious mind, okay? And they're trying to discharge that because the realizations that would come about if the discharge is not facilitated, if the energy stays in the person, they're going to go through a contemplative cycle. They're going to contemplate something to its logical conclusion. And this has nothing to do with meditation. This is a natural human process. People contemplate when they're riding on the subway, going to work in the morning and home in the evening. Okay? People contemplate things. And when you think about something, if there isn't a resolution to it, then a kind of a tension will build up. Okay? Now, if you're perceiving correctly, you will not be the only one who is picking up on these things. And then what will happen is public chatter will begin. People will begin to talk and go, hey, are you noticing this? You know, a classic example is the vaccine. Okay? So a certain portion of the population had an internal understanding and an associated contemplation process based on the unarticulated understanding. You could call this your intuition, your gut. There's many things that this kind of understanding has been called throughout history, but it's what I would call an irrational understanding. Okay? But you kind of know you're right. Because you trust yourself, right? And that's because human beings were made and created to be sensitive and to pick things up. And one of the things they've done with the black box trials of the public world is they put gladiators out there that you have to go and fight, like the Weinstein brothers. You know, Brett Weinstein and his brother Eric, the theoretical physicist and the evolutionary biologist. Okay? They're on every podcast. And they're constantly reinforcing this black box perception of reality, you know, as given to us by what Cliff High correctly calls the gritologists who reinforce the materium and the false ontology. And that's exactly what they're doing, whether they're conscious of it or not. A lot of people who choose to occupy this position just do it because it's a good way to make a living, get famous, and to get some attention energy. Okay? But it doesn't mean that what you feel isn't correct. And when chatter starts, that's a very dangerous point for societies. And so let's take again, as I said, the example of the pandemic and the vaccine. Okay, a lot of chatter started. A lot of us had an intuitive feeling that this wasn't right. Okay, I knew nothing about medical science. I remember the first detailed conversation I had about this was with my brother, and I haven't spoken to him since. That was 5 years ago. I called him up and I said, look, I'm in Costa Rica. I'm not going to get this vaccine. I don't think you should get it. I don't think my sister-in-law should get it. And I don't think my niece and nephew should get it. My brother was reasonably polite, but he's a black box guy. He's lived in the system his whole life. It's treated him very well. He has a lovely home. Enough savings to live comfortably till the day he dies. Okay? And he says, well, why do you feel that way? And I said, look, it's like this. His name's Ross, my brother. I said, Ross, throughout our entire lives, medicine has operated at a cellular level. Chemotherapy and radiation kill cancer cells. Antibiotics kill viruses, which operate at the cellular or combined cellular level. Medicine has never gone below the cellular level before. Now, when they cracked, I'm telling my brother all this. I said, look, when they cracked the human genome in the late 90s, we were promised a whole new gamut of medicines that never came about 25 years ago, 27 years ago. Many of you might not remember this. There was a period in the mid to late 90s where biology was the sexiest science on the planet. There were more popular books being written about biology than there were about physics. And it all had to do with the mapping of the human genome. All of the science and even the popular magazines were writing lengthy articles and doing extensive interviews with experts in this field. And we were promised a new form of medicine that sounded so fantastical, you could have openly said, we're not going to be sick anymore in one generation, and nobody would have thought you were being hyperbolic. Now let's say all this happened in 1997. Or capped in 97. Well, here we are 28 years later, and none of this medicine has come about. And the first instantiation of we get of medicine that goes below the cellular level is an M-ribonucleic acid, cousin to deoxyribonucleic acid, vaccine to counter a virus. Well, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a biologist. I don't work in virology. But just at the level of common sense, if you think about that, it doesn't make any sense. Why do you need something operating at the RNA level to battle a virus? The entire story was full of shit from the beginning. Okay? And I liked Joe Rogan when he trusted his gut and got high and shot the shit with his buddies for his podcast 10 years ago. I liked him better when he did that than what he's doing now. Because what they did to Joe was they got him into this black box world. And he's all about proof and rationale because he's been spanked. He's had some big intellectuals on his show. And he gets spanked because this is hard science, don't you know? Well, an absolute reality is the myth of the black box. We actually live in a reality where subjectivity dictates objectivity to a degree, not in totality. Which is why they need to harvest our thoughts and feelings to co-create their outcomes. Which is why we get all the propaganda and all the programming coming out of the Hollywood arm and the music industry arm of the military, industrial, entertainment, pharmaceutical complex. Okay? And all of it is telling us, and here's the ironic mirror. The ironic mirror basically means that you invert everything to understand what's going on. Okay? That's one way of looking at the ironic mirror. It's more complicated than that, but I'm probably not going to be able to get all of it articulated tonight. So the cover story is we're going into a golden age of science and health. Flip it. What's the opposite of that? New technology at the deoxyribonucleic acid level is going to be used to cull the human race and fulfill Agenda 2030. You see how that works? I'll give you another one. The Jewish Holocaust. Okay? This is a really important one to understand in 2025. And it'll give you an understanding of how this methodology of disclosure and simultaneous disclosure and obfuscation works at the very same time. And this is the linchpin of how they control the collective mind. They can't control all the individual minds, but when an individual mind and an individual voice and an individual perspective becomes too vocal and vociferous, they'll go in and try and humiliate the person. If the Talamanca Review gets big enough, I may have this done to me in 3 or 4 years. But I doubt I'll get big enough. And I don't think I'm on that track. I think my purpose is to connect with people who understand that I'm telling them the truth, and the situation we're living in is as dire and serious as I'm telling you in the Talamanca Review and in my books. Okay? And that's a special kind of person. That's like, my listenership is 1 out of every 50,000 people. Okay? And I'm cool with that. I don't do this for a living. I just spent the first 20 minutes of today's podcast telling you what, in fact, I do for a living. And I'm fine with that. I'm fine being this little shoe cobbler who does technical writing. Tick, 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 tick. They pay me very well. Okay? I don't need to podcast to make a living. I podcast to reach like-minded people, to share my spirit and my insight with other people, and to share my unique ability to articulate complicated concepts and ideas and structures to people. Psychic structures, spiritual processes. This aspect of my life I've been involved with for 40 years, meditating and fasting and reading scriptures and meeting fascinating people from different lineage traditions and learning about consciousness, and then proving it out through my own experience as a contemplative, and then coming back to you and sharing it with you and juxtaposing it to the public narrative they're telling us is reality. That's my role. So in the Holocaust narrative, we're told that 6 million Jews were killed in Nazi death camps. Now, the first thing you have to note is the language. Holocaust. Okay? Now let's look that up because it's very important to get the language right because this is the principle of them doing it right in front of you. Okay? They do it right in front of you and nobody catches on. The word Holocaust originates from the Greek word holocauston, meaning sacrifice by fire. Okay? It's not a barbecue. You don't kill the animal in a normal killing process and barbecue it with fire. The fire is actually the instrument of the destruction of a living organism. This is a religious concept. This is a ritual concept, Holocaust. Okay? This term was used in Greek translations of the Hebrew Bible. So you see what they just did there? They actually begin by telling us the word has its origin in Greek and then tell us, well, it's the Greek word for a Hebrew translation of a Hebrew word, which means, what does it mean, folks? It means the word has its origin in Hebrew. You understand? Okay. The term was used in Greek translations of the Hebrew Bible. And the Hebrew Bible is what? The Torah. Okay? To refer to burnt offerings. Over time, it became associated with large-scale destruction or slaughter and was eventually adopted to describe the systematic persecution and murder of Jews during World War II. You know what? I'm going to go to my Gemini AI now, and I'm going to ask Gemini, okay? Can you give me any example of the concept of a Holocaust in history before World War II? This is going to be interesting. I'm actually, do not be afraid of AI. It is a absolutely fascinating tool, actually. While the Holocaust under Nazi Germany is the most infamous and well-documented example of genocide, the concept of systemic state-sponsored persecution and mass extermination of a specific group existed before World War. So immediately they deviate from the word Holocaust. Okay? When you start, this is why I look words up on the Talamanca Review right in front of you. They are changing things right before our eyes. That's not what I asked. I asked specifically, not for genocides, I asked for a Holocaust. Okay? And we don't use the word Holocaust for anything other than what allegedly happened at Auschwitz and Dachau and a few other camps. Okay? So a Holocaust is a burnt offering. Okay? Well, let me ask you, are they not now doing a Holocaust, or did they not this past Passover do a Holocaust? So those red heifers are killed and then burned to ash. They're ritually killed and burnt. Let's ask. How are the red heifers killed in the pre-temple ritual for the Temple of Solomon? In the ritual for preparing of the red heifer, a ritually pure priest slaughters the heifer and sprinkles its blood towards the temple. The heifer is then burned on a pier with cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet thread. Oh, this isn't fucking Harry Potter. This isn't magic. And the creator of everything seen and unseen wants this. Are you fucking kidding me? And there's people who still believe this shit. Okay? The ashes are collected and mixed with water to create a cleansing solution for ritual purification. That is a Holocaust. That is a burnt offering. Okay? Now, here's the ironic mirror in a perfect example, okay? How things get turned around and spun around and all of these sorts of things. Why do we call the alleged slaughter of 6 million Jews in Nazi concentration camps during World War II a Holocaust? And who calls it a Holocaust? Okay? So we are told the Germans did it. Okay? A Holocaust is a ritual killing and a ritual burning of something that was once alive. And then the ashes themselves are used in ritual. This is a Holocaust. This is the true nature of a burnt offering. So by the language that's being used in contemporary usage, and for the last 3 or 4 decades, we are indirectly being told rabbis did this. How would SS officers know how to do a Holocaust? It is a very specific ritual, a burnt offering, and part of the Jewish religion. Were the SS officers Jewish? No. No. Were Jews killed in the death camps? Yes. Were they experimented on, especially the twins? Absolutely. Were they treated horribly? Yes. Is it one of the most degrading things in the last 300 or 400 years of human history? Abso-fucking-lutely. I'd be livid if I were Jewish. Okay? But why call it a Holocaust? It's the language I'm asking you about tonight. Why call it a Holocaust? A Holocaust could only be performed by a certified, ritually purified rabbi. All right? That's one aspect of the ironic mirror. Here's the second. And there are more to this one, but I'll close out with this one. We are daily through television and movies, and look at the article that Larry David penned for New Yorker magazine. I think it was New Yorker or New York magazine. He penned an op-ed about Bill Maher going to dinner at the White House to meet Donald Trump. And he Hitler. Larry David, the Jewish comedian who lives in Beverly Hills, most famous as a writer and co-creator of Seinfeld, and subsequently the star and principal writer of HBO's Curb Your Enthusiasm. Hitler, 2025. Holocaust and Nazi movies have come out this year. Quentin Tarantino did Inglourious Basterds despite the fact he's an Italian kid from Los Angeles. Why are there so many Nazi movies? Why are we constantly reminded of something that wasn't even a Holocaust? And why do we constantly have the word Holocaust applied to it? Because it has to do with the way they manipulate consciousness to get what they want, to manifest or magnetize the result that they want. We are in a Holocaust. We're being holocausted. We're being holocausted right now. Okay? We're the ones that are being killed with the vaccine and mass incinerated. And all the while this is going on, so our minds don't clue into it, the technique of the ironic mirror is used so the emotions and senses that build up in our spiritual intuitive infrastructure are displaced into a false narrative that probably never happened, so we don't see the Holocaust that is happening right now to us. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review.